I think really all good writing can be summarized by like clarity, connection, and community. You want to be clear about what you're writing for people and what your intention is for them. You want to be clear who your audience is. You want to have a connection. You want to have an emotional beat to it. There has to be a heartbeat to it.
Hey there, it's Samantha Hartley of the Profitable Joyful Consulting Podcast. This season, we have been talking about consulting skills. And as I mentioned, writing is one of the most important consulting skills. I was not told there would be this much writing in consulting, is probably the reaction you have had. We have to write for clients. We have to write for persuasion, for copywriting, for ourselves. You have to write emails. There's just tons and tons of writing that needs to be done. And I've talked about content writing in past episodes. And today I want to talk more about telling your story, about mining your story. And I have invited an amazing guest to help me to do that. She is a ghost, also known as a ghostwriter. So today you get to meet a real ghost and hear her secrets, how she is doing that magic for her clients, including some of my clients, I'm happy to say. So let's meet Laura. Laura Elliott is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling ghostwriter of biography, memoir, history, business, and leadership, and she specializes in survival stories, entrepreneurship, and journeys of the heart. She earned her chops working at Entertainment Television on shows like True Hollywood Story, which gave her an appetite for finding the story behind the story. She further developed her skills at the Los Angeles Times, OMG, where she reported on features, entertainment, crime, hard news, politics, and investigative journalism. Yay. She has a passion for travel, particularly life at sea, where she is located right now. She's calling in from her boat, and makes her home on the beach in Santa Cruz, California, with her husband, daughters, their families, and her dog, also her muse, Lucy. So let's meet Laura. Laura, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. And I'm so excited you're going to help me to talk about writing because it's, I have a liberal arts degree. And so I went to Sarah Lawrence. We didn't have tests or grades. Everybody's like, how the heck does that work? And it's like, well, we wrote papers. We wrote and wrote and wrote. And in my earliest jobs, the way that I kind of apparently stood out, it was through writing. Like I had a lot of people come to me and be like, oh my God, can you write some more stuff for us? So writing is a major strength for me, but it's not for a lot of the people that I run into. And they're like, as I said in the opening, like, I just did not expect there to be this much writing. So we have to write for persuasion. We have to write all these things. And one of the hardest things is writing our own story. So can we start by hearing a little bit about you, what you do, and your story?
Oh, okay. So what I do is I am a ghostwriter and I usually write books and screenplays for people. So exactly what you're saying is what people come to me with is I'm not a writer. I don't know how to do this. There's a lot of self-confidence. There's a lot of self-doubt. There's this idea that they're trying to be some perfect thing. And there really is no way to be perfect in writing. You know, what we do when I work with somebody is we get together and a story, the best stories transform people. They're an emotional ride, even if it's a post, even if it's just an email or whatever. You know, it's transformative. You want the person to be different after hearing whatever it is you've said. And we really often think about a book that we read being transformative or a movie that we see. Those are the ones that are gold. Those are the ones that we remember, are the ones that we're different afterwards. But a lot of people don't realize that also the writing transforms the writer. Writing a book does that for people. And it's a process where you're evolving with it, and you start with one idea and you think it's going to be one thing, and it just ends up being something that's so much bigger and so much more material, just because you have this community of people you're working with that really unearth the story and help you get to the bottom of what the bigger message might be. Because no one comes to me writing a book with one idea in mind. They really, what really ends up happening is it gets to be a platform for a huge movement in the world that they didn't even know they were having in some cases.
Yeah.
So it's really amazing. I think some of the things that stand out for me are just, being able to organize things for people, being able to make it effortless for people, and also help them face the challenges, not just creative challenges, but the challenges that crop up in writing itself, in life that happens. So
Yeah.
it's a real privilege and an honor to help people who otherwise wouldn't be able to put a story on the page or on the screen to get them there. And that's just my joy, is to do that.
Love that. So can you share one example of somebody who came to you and was not able to do that themselves, and that you did that for them?
Yeah. Okay. So it's so hard to come with just one example, but there's two. I'll say two really quick. One is a lady who had a coaching business, and she wanted to leverage her cancer survival story because it taught her so many things about coaching. I write for people all over the world. And this is an energetic, vivacious, wonderful lady who hoped to increase her coaching business. Well, she changed her culture, because in her culture, she couldn't even use the word cancer to tell her story. People called it the disease. And because she stepped out and talked about conquering this terrible illness, which came to her in a horrible way, that she overcame it in so many inspiring ways, that she became a celebrity. And all of a sudden, her culture started talking about cancer. I mean, actually using the
Yeah.
word. So
Mm-hmm.
the book turned her into a celebrity. It knocked her off the charts with her career, and also gave her a platform for theatrical work. So that
Amazing.
was very unintended, right? So all these things that come about, people want to be on the New York Times, they want to sell books, they want to have speaking careers, they want all these things to happen, and they all do. But I think the one thing that is amazing are the things that happen to the person inside.
Yeah.
And having said that, we've worked through all kinds of things, like now for another one, a lady was interested in writing a series of books, and with a certain purpose. And it takes a while to write a series of books, right?
Yeah.
So life happens, and I'll never forget the call I got. She told me that her son committed suicide.
Mm.
And so the work changed completely. We wrote a completely different project. Deepak Chopra wrote the testimonial for it.
Wow.
It got a Kirkus Star review, which for people who don't know, that is like the World Series of reviews for like being stocked in bookstores and things like that. And a speaking career that would just be her lifeblood and take off in new directions. And the other books are being worked on also. But this is the other thing, as a writer, you learn about yourself. You are mining things, like we were saying, memories really is what we end up mining, and we use life and we go with it. It has a flow. And so, the work we start on at the beginning is one version, but the work that ends up is so much greater and more impactful than you can ever imagine.
Wow. I mean, it sounds amazing. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of my clients who have written books, and they have had those kinds of experiences where it's never what they expect when they go into it.
Yeah.
And I do think it's just so kind of like, as a personal development exercise, it's really incredible. Before we go deeper into writing, just for my clients who have written or are planning to write a book or are in the process of writing books, those New York Times bestseller list goals, I think it's hard not to have them. Like, you really kind of have a dream for yourself. You want to have something like that. What do you think is the kind of the deciding point between something that really has the potential to be a New York Times bestseller versus, every other book out there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things about it. I think the passion behind the project, the voice on the page, is the thing that's really going to change it. And I think that's the one thing that happens when you're working with a ghostwriter or someone else on a project is I find very often, which is incredible to me. It's baffling, really, that I work with people that are thought leaders and experts and all these people who have big voices in the world, but yet don't know how to have a voice on the page. They're struggling with their own voice. So we kind of practice, what is it? Like we talk, and this voice gets stronger and bolder. And it's like, it's like the first sentence, the first paragraph is a handshake with the reader. It's the book's promise. And I think when you drill down on the book's promise and you say, what am I going to deliver this reader? What is this? Being specific, knowing your audience, you really need to know who you're writing for. You really know your intention with your project. It's in your heart. It's there. But, people sometimes won't do a little bit of that thought ahead of time. So with my work, always starts with the book's promise, the audience, and the voice. Those are the three major things that really people need to be clear about if their intention is to get on something like that on these lists. But I think it's really about the heart behind the project. It can't just be like, let's say I'm writing about pillows and I've got 5 steps to write about pillows, right? And there's a lot of book about pillows out there. Well, what's going to make me buy your book about pillows is because I know why you love pillows so much. What was it about you? Like with E, right? The story behind the story. What is it about you and pillows? We want to know, it's that thing that we really are interested in. What is driving you and interlacing that in your story? And that helps with the emotion, putting the emotion on the page and making it a transformational experience for readers. And lots of times, I'll be working for, I kind of call it like geek biz, maybe if it's Bitcoin or scientists or something, it's a relatability also, right? So we have to be relatable to people. Yet we also need to surprise a little bit, right? So you don't want to be like, if you're going to read a book about, this neuroscience behind something, you very much surprise people when you're warm and fuzzy and you really know some of this information and you've got a backstory about it. So people want to know a little bit more about the person that's writing the book and why they should be listening to you.
Well, so this to me is the toughest piece in some ways, because having come out of 8th grade English class where they're like, you never use I, you always use passive voice, you're nobody, you can sometimes use we, but like you're not an authority. And so I think so many of us had that drilled into us when we were children. And then to emerge, what I will see, I'll correct passive voice in my clients' work a lot, but also just that kind of standing in your own authority. But then the piece that you're talking about is the story behind the story. And I feel like it was hard for me. Like I wanted to write about everything except for me. And you, as a subscriber to my newsletter, I'm writing a lot about myself now, but for years I didn't write about me because I felt like, but that's not what's really relevant. Like what's really relevant is like this or the work or the thing. And the most response I get from readers, and a lot of times the response that I'll get in terms of wanting to work with me is the posts that are more personal or the things that are more personal. So, how do we figure out which parts of our personal story are compelling and relevant and which parts are, I'm trying to find a nice word for it, but kind of like self-grandiosity or whatever?
That's a very interesting question. I think a lot of it is practice. To be honest with you, I think that journalism has changed so much. I will never forget when I was working at the LA Times and the Nieman School of Journalism at Harvard. They came to speak to us to talk about narrative journalism and the rise of it. And really the beginning of it was In Cold Blood with Truman Capote, and how he took journalism from a fire occurred on the 5th block of this neighborhood at this time, right? Which was the reporting. And now it's about emotion. So there was like a real focus and war a little bit about editorializing. News is competing with entertainment. At the time that I was in the newsroom, there was all these things going on around that. So, it's a story. A story is what we're interested in. We're hardwired for it. We're programmed for it. Aristotle, the 3-act play structure is still in place. Joseph Campbell, huge philosopher. The brains behind really the Star Wars with George Lucas. He came up with, the hero's journey, basic steps of how to organize a story. And these are things that we respond to story with our heart, really, not our head. There's a lot of head stories that are out there, but until you get someone's heart, they're really not going to go anywhere with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing. So it really is about practice. It's also, when I say that, it's not, it's about finding your own voice. And I really suggest that people really take The Artist's Way seriously with Julia Cameron, because that is how you find your voice. You know, one of the exercises she recommends in this book is to write the morning pages. You write 3 pages a day. It's a creative exercise for anyone. You don't have to be an artist. Just to get the stuff out that's there, that's on your head. It's the top stuff, and that gets in the way of getting to the deeper stuff, which is where the real magic is. So, you know, just practicing using your voice and seeing what's, you know, everybody's different. Some people are more comfortable having more things out there. Some people aren't. Some people want to approach. I'm going to tell you right now, what you said is the most common thing that happens to me when I work with anyone, including myself.
Yeah.
Showing up on the page. Like, it's so hard. Like, we're on the page, right? And so that exercise alone is it's a natural thing. It happens all the time. And I think that when you creep up to it, you know, maybe a consultant who really is having a hard time can try something with posts and blogs and things like that. You know, short pieces, and see what, you know, feels good, because that's it. It's also about, you know, trying things, and don't be afraid to try things. You know, that's what it is. Writing's like anything else. You know, you practice it, you do it. You're okay if it's not perfect. You're okay if it goes to the moon and it gets 1 million hits. That's great. You're okay with crickets, because guess what? People are still reading it. If they didn't like it or whatever, that's okay. Somebody's seeing it, somebody's reading it. So it's this practice with voice that I think is really important.
So
Yeah.
say more about that. Like, what does it mean to practice with voice?
Well, I think, like I said, I think the journaling, you know, that's one way of helping. One thing that we touched a little bit about is reading the work aloud. That's one way that you can really hear it, because when we write, it's really not the same thing. The other thing that we need, like if you're a consultant and you're writing, you need a team of people around you, because you're going to write what you're going to write, and you're not going to see everything that's in it, the good, the bad, whatever. So there's always an editor, there's always a copywriter. When I was working in the newsroom, and my editor knew that I wrote fiction, he was like, "Who's your editor, Laura?" Because like at the paper, I had, you know, editors, copy editors, things like that. And I said, well, you know, I'm just kind of working with a loose group of what. He's like, Laura, everybody needs an editor. So really everybody does. You're not going to see, I think if there's one hire that I would make, it would be a proofreader. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Please, everybody proofread.
Yeah.
And also just getting a second opinion, you know, and so working through that, I think, is the best way to help your voice shine, because there's nothing like a careless typo that, you know, takes people out.
Right.
Some people are a little bit more than others, you know. You really want to just be a crescendo. You know, you want to start your work in a certain place at the beginning, and then have it a crescendo and have people be changed as a result.
I feel like it's for those of us who are like writing a lot of social posts or writing a lot of newsletters and things like that. Like, it's hard to get a crescendo into everything we write.
Right.
It's something to strive for. But I do want to go back to the thing of reading out loud, because right before we started recording, I was talking about David McCullough, who is just someone I adore. He's an American historian, wrote many famous biographies and histories, including a book called 1776, Americans in Paris, a biography of the Brooklyn Bridge. His first book was about the Jonestown flood. So he was a figure here on Martha's Vineyard, so I got to see him speak a few times. And we have, since he recently passed, just feeling sad, we went and watched a bunch of YouTube talks that he gave, and it was wonderful to hear him talk. And if you watch a lot of someone's talk, then you start to hear things over and over again. And one of the things that he mentioned repeatedly was that he and his wife, Rosalie, would read his books. Every single one of his books, he said, had been read aloud to one another numerous times. And I think what's amazing about that is if you like, if you read your work, you'll know like where you stumble. And if you stumble when you read it, then your people are going to stumble when they read it. And so I think it's just so helpful. Like there are small tips that those of us who, I mean, I'm nowhere near at your level, but those of us who consider ourselves professional writers, there are things that we do religiously. So we write every day. I write a version of morning pages. I wanted to ask you, handwritten or typed?
It's up to you, whatever your process. Everybody's process is different.
Yeah.
I handwritten for me. I enjoy that because I'm at the computer quite a bit. But ideas flow in different ways. Where our brains are wired differently.
Yeah.
You know, in that respect, you know, it's like very similar to an artist who will draw a picture and then hold it up to the mirror and see where the picture isn't quite working. If you
Yeah.
reverse it, you can see where the perspective is off. But
Yeah.
yeah, and with
That's a
the read
great trick.
aloud,
Yeah.
yeah, and with the read aloud, I would have to say I came to it through Jim Trelease, who
Hmm.
did something called the Read Aloud Handbook,
Yeah.
and he believes that reading aloud to children, you know, this experience it's community experience. A book isn't just, it can be very personal and beautiful,
Yeah.
but it's also meant to be shared. And so that's how I came through the read aloud idea, was through you know, when I was raising my kids at a very young
Yeah.
age. Yeah.
Oh,
Reading
it's
books.
incredible. I mean, I have the best memories of fifth grade. I had a teacher who read books to us every single day for an hour after lunch, and you'd think you'd be sleepy after lunch.
Yeah.
Instead, I was like enthralled. I can still remember the phrasing she used on some things. You know, she read the mixed up files of Mrs. Oh my gosh, I thought I could say it, but I couldn't. But you know, that
Yeah.
one, like these wonderful children's book, reading them out loud. So I really, really, really love that. And
So,
I just think it's so informative to read your work aloud. And also I
mhm.
like the idea that you talked about. Like, I feel like we don't do this enough, where to have like reader circles, like anybody, you know, we have a lot of writers communities here on the Vineyard. And so people who
Definitely.
are writers are always a part of a circle of people who write and read their work to one another and get feedback. And whether that's poetry or memoir or
Mhm.
fiction and short form fiction or essays, like there is that here everywhere. And I think just having someone who is like, you don't even have to do it for a long time, but I feel like having any feedback at all on your writing is super helpful, because if you have something like social, then you might have, you know, you might have big responses or whatever, but it can really help to have somebody who is like, I want to help you improve the quality of your writing and to turn that into something. So
Yeah,
you
and
haven't,
even yeah,
go
and
ahead.
even these newsletters, you know, you've written a newsletter, people will reply and respond and
They
tell you
do.
what really, you know, the feedback is
Mhm.
important.
They'll
Yeah.
rarely say you could have developed that story better, or I think of you going for that. You know, I
Yeah.
sometimes they will, believe me, but in general, like you tend to hear
Yeah.
back. But what's nice is like the things that people do respond to. And you know, I'm grateful that I get a lot of fan mail. When I ran a different kind of business, I would get a lot of customer service hate mail. So back in the bad old days, but
Yeah.
getting a response from your readers, it does tell you what's working in the writing, and it does encourage, I think, the things that you're talking about. So
Yeah.
in I wanted to go a little further in finding your voice. So writing often, writing morning pages, reading your
Mhm.
work out loud, how do you how does that begin to reconcile the difference between your written voice and your spoken voice?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I think what you realize the more you practice, the more you do that, is you get clarity. And clarity is really important. It's the way you connect with people, and you need, and you also get in touch with your intention better. So, and I think it's all about confidence. You know, it's all about just putting yourself out there. It's all about showing up on the page. It's showing up to your writing every day. It's an attitude behind the writing. You know, it's we all have to do it, as you say. It's a big part of your job that you didn't expect, right? So when you come to the page and your cup is full, you've taken care of yourself in terms of your writing and nurturing yourself, then you show up to those things instead of like, oh, I gotta write this thing. What am I gonna write in this newsletter? You know,
Yeah.
oh, this is the last thing I want to write, right?
Yeah.
Um, and oftentimes it is, right? But we can work around that and find out our own process and honor it. We have
Mhm.
a process. We all have a creative process. I have some people that have talked books into microphones because they can't
Mhm.
write. They're too busy or distracted or whatever.
Mhm.
Whatever your process is, investigate. What is it? Maybe start that journey. What is your process? Honor it.
Yeah.
If you like to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's the only time your house is quiet, and this is,
Mhm.
if you need a whole day to write all your newsletters for the
Mhm.
year or a weekend or whatever,
Yeah.
because you get into newsletter mode and you just want to, do it.
Hang them out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if we just simplify,
Yeah.
if we just simplify it and get down to the real basics, I think really all good writing can be summarized by like, I think you could just say clarity, connection, and community. You want to be clear about what you're writing for people and what your intention is for them. You want to be clear who your audience is. You want to have a connection. You want to have an emotional beat to it. There has to be a heartbeat to it. And there has to be a community because, I know a lot of people who have beautiful writing in their drawer and they're not sharing it with anyone. So,
Mhm.
you know, there's all kinds of ways we can do this. And to take it out of the scary thing, we have all kinds of writings we do that can be leveraged in other ways.
Yeah.
So think about all the writing you have and how you can leverage it for another purpose, or retool it. Or, we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, but I do recommend, when I work with my clients, one of the first things I always ask them to do is to journal however they want. If that's by talking, if that's by actually handwriting it out, however they want to do, because the process of putting an idea in your head and revisiting it, I call it making appointments with your imagination. Every week, we talk weekly. Um, your brain shows up and starts remembering and starts knowing what to talk about in a way that's visceral, in a way that was maybe at the beginning it's like, oh, I'd like to talk about this and this is what I'd like it to be. Well, now we're in it and it's going, and so you get, it's the notebook by the bed, it's the whatever, you're on the train and you come up with a new idea, or maybe you take more walks, maybe you meditate more during this time,
Mhm.
and you will start to generate a lot of content, a
Mhm.
lot.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Ideas, you unblock the flow, and ideas do begin to come to you.
absolutely. And make appointments with your imagination. You don't have to work with me to do it. You just say, okay, Laura, Saturday morning is going to be my time
Yeah.
to be creative in my writing life, and and take it out of the box. Maybe you're writing for a newsletter for a technical piece. Well, write about other things too. You can always write around something.
Mhm.
That's what I talk about when we're working on a book. You don't see the revenue stream even at the end of the book. You can see it at the time of it. You write around it. You write articles for different magazines about what you're doing and make connections with people, because these are your community of people that are going to be your readers. Writing not shared in community is private and beautiful, and there is a kind of writing that's important for that. You don't share everything, to your point before, right? I
Yeah.
don't share everything I've written on the
Right.
page,
Right.
but there is writing that I do want out in the world, and we do need to have that out in the world to inspire people, to let them know our movements, to in one of my clients change even culture, to say
Yeah.
the word
Yeah.
cancer, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's reasons why we're writing in community, and
Mhm.
just honoring that is really important, and recognizing that.
Absolutely. So I want to just go back one more time to this idea of the story behind the story for ourselves. Do we need someone like you to identify what our story is behind the story, or how could you help us to figure out
Yeah,
what that is? I feel like when I work with a lot of people, they're like, I don't know what my story is. It's kind of like,
I know.
well, it doesn't seem to have like these dramatic turning points. Well, and maybe there are those and we're immune to them, and maybe there aren't those.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really, for the same reason that we can't edit our own work. We need someone to see the greater themes in our life.
Hmm.
For someone, it's hard to put our story on the page because, we don't have that voice yet. We don't really know how to articulate our story yet. And so I think it is very important to have a trusted person help you with that, because it is an honor to help someone find what their real story is. I've had people come to me thinking that, their story was sort of up here and not very of consequence. And it would go out to change the world. So I think we're blind
Yeah,
to our own significance in some
totally.
way.
We're
And I
immune
think
to our own superpowers.
I know it happens for lots of reasons. I think we have to just day to day, we have to get through things. We have to just accomplish things and stuff like that. So this is, yeah, and what I find is I provide a little island of safety, of a place where a reflection can occur. And I would love to say that that happens every day for everybody in a healthy way, but it doesn't. I think until they make this time to really dedicate and do that, that the work really, the ability to define that story isn't really, the time isn't given to it any other way.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't take a lot of time to figure out the background, the story behind the story. But if you're doing a greater work, it can take some time. It can take some time to see the
Yeah.
theme of that. But like just a personal story, something that you can use for your newsletter or marketing, that's something that could probably be done in a few hours. But when you're working on a longer work, it really, there's so many things that happen during the generation of the work. You don't really, I have a lot of clients ask me, when will we get an agent, or when will we do this, or when will we publish this? And
Mhm.
I say, when it's brilliant. I have absolutely, unless there's a real timeline on it.
Yeah. And it will be brilliant. Yeah.
It will be brilliant. It has to be, and it will be brilliant.
Yeah.
But brilliance is the key. The book is the key. The story is the key. All the other stuff happens after. Yeah.
Amazing. Now you have written books and screenplays for some people whose names we would recognize, right? Really famous people. What do you feel like distinguishes their stories from the, everyday people like you and me?
Well, they were everyday people. Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, right? So I think that a lot of people who bring their story, it's hard for everybody. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for they're everyday people too. So even being out there, you would think some people being out there is really easy, but it's not. So I think it gets to the fact that it's universal. Story is universal. What affects us is universal. So I think anybody can be a superstar. I don't really think that it's a privilege held by certain people. I think, if a story is compelling, it's going to find an audience, and they will run with it. And that's absolutely it. And then the other thing that happens quite frequently with people I work with is there's a story that's untold,
Mhm.
or relatively little known, that happens. And I work that, with people in the areas of war,
Mm.
um, who have little known stories, or even in the Holocaust. I've completed a screenplay about the Farhud, which is something that people, I'll say the Farhud and people will be like, what's that?
Yeah.
Right. And not know that Jewish people were persecuted in Babylon during World
Mhm.
War II, and it was a
Mhm.
Holocaust there. So, there's just all these stories in the world that, come to us. And I think what also happens is when there's stories that stay with us, we're like, they teach us something. It doesn't even have to be something big. It's just something about our own heart, or something about the way we could have been different in a situation, or about tolerance, or inclusiveness, or whatever. I write very much for minority businesses also. And I find that, coming from that background, of knowing, where and why and how this has all been created, gives you a level of appreciation that you wouldn't. I mean, of course you appreciate someone who's doing fantastic in business and is
Yeah.
a genius and all that,
Yeah.
but you don't know the story behind the story. You don't know the struggles that came with it. And that gives you even more of an aha in that moment. Yeah.
For sure. I think it always looks easy once you see success.
Yeah.
And it's hard for anybody to imagine, like, well, that was easy for them, and my story is completely different than that. And it's like, no, there's almost always been
Yeah.
obstacles along the way, and we only see like the snapshot of success instead of the whole entire thing.
Yeah. It's this idea of relatability again.
Right. So
being
what makes someone relatable, and how does one for themselves, like, how can I make myself more relatable to my audience? How do I even do that?
yeah. So I think you kind of help them understand why you're doing what you're doing. Like, so I'll start with me. Um, I didn't ever think in a million, no one grows up wanting to be a ghost. What the
Right.
heck is that, right? So um, I did a lot of interviews, do a lot of interviews, have done a lot of interviews with celebrities, with movers and shakers, with travel, in the travel world, and the explorers, famous explorers from all over the world, that type of thing. And I didn't know that I would do that as a direct result of interviewing my dad for a personal story, trying to
Mm,
get his story behind his story. He was a Japanese prisoner of war, and he
uh,
never talked about till he was 80. And
wow.
so we kept talking and talking and having these letters written back and forth between us about the story and putting that together. And he would be the greatest interview of my life, because he was wanting to tell a story like everybody, right? He's my model for everyone I talk to. He
Uh-huh.
wants to tell his story, but for various reasons he couldn't.
Mhm.
And in this case, it was trauma.
Yeah.
But there's lots of reasons people can't access that genuine part of themselves. There's lots of reasons people can't go there with themselves.
Mm,
So, for him, when he was too traumatized, he would talk about the general history of the time.
mm,
And little by little, you find ways in. It's not intrusive. It's in order for them to understand their story better. It's maybe not for publication. A
yeah.
lot of what we discover does not end up on the page.
Hmm.
Absolutely. We
Hmm.
discover lots of things that don't end up on the
Right.
page. But there's a way in, and it takes some time, and it's this interview process. So I never thought that just doing that, when I was curious at my daughter's first birthday party, when my brother pointed to this bench and said, that's a concentration camp bench. And it was a bench that he had made with us for all the kids for all the years of our lives. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And
Wow.
that one question about, tell me the first bench you made, Dad, tell me about that. I never knew that that would put me on a career to be a ghostwriter. There's
Mm,
just something about being able to help people tell their story that wouldn't be able to. And
incredible.
whether it's a legacy story just for the family, which is
Mhm.
another part of thing, or it's for publication, it's sacred no matter what,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's wonderful. Yeah,
And legacy stories just for the family are so important. I mean, I
they
think,
are.
it's my husband and I have been sharing them, and we share them in my family. And, once that person is gone, we think, who knows the thing? We have to, find people who do know them. So I do think those legacy stories can be.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah, and when they die, people have come to me. One particular person found hundreds of letters in an attic after his father passed away, and it made a book out of that. So they're precious and priceless. But I think the question that I always ask at the beginning of a project, and it could be for any project, is why this story now? You can ask
Mhm.
that for a newsletter. You can ask that for a post. You can ask that for a blog, and particularly for a book or a screenplay. Why now? Why are we doing this now? That's a very important question to ask for you, when you're writing a piece, and it'll give you inspiration. You'll probably be able to write even more when you know why.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very inspiring just thinking about it. Um,
Yeah.
Okay, so I could just talk about this forever. I want to just do a couple more things. Uh, I always think of writing in business as consultants as really in two categories. One is we write about our expertise, and then the other one is we're writing for more persuasion or for someone
Mhm.
to spur action. So a lot of us feel much more comfortable writing our expertise. It's like it's the thing we talk about, and what we've talked about a lot today has been how to make writing your expertise even more effective, and weaving story into it and things like that. When we're writing for persuasion, how do you see the work that you're doing improving persuasion, and how can we as maybe non-professional writers do better in that area?
Yeah. So, when this question just reminds me of being in Mr. Post's class in seventh grade, speech class, where he wants us to write a persuasive speech,
There you go.
and it's like, oh my God, it's persuasive speech. It's like completely different than anything else I'm writing and stuff like that. And there are certain hallmarks that are there uh, to persuade. And then for my world, it would be writing an op-ed piece, right?
Yeah.
So if you write an op-ed, and I was, I've gone to so many workshops and so many things, and this particular bit of information came from the editor of the Jakarta Post. I was in Bali for the Readers and Writers Festival there and attended a journalism class there. And he said, one of the most important things when you're trying to convince something of what you want to convince them for is to take away the argument against it. So the first thing you do is you realize what the resistance is. It has to do with resistance, right? With persuasion, you want to eliminate resistance. So what you do is you address it. It's an elephant in the room, right? It's like, I'm using the pillow analogy, I want pillows that are really soft. And then you have to go and say why hard ones are, take the air out of that argument, or whatever you anticipate would be the most important thing that would come up for that person. And that's one of those things. And then it's the crescendo, like you're talking about. And I understand when you're saying, newsletters and stuff like that, crescendo, but what you really want to do is you want to have that intention, right? So if you don't have room for a real crescendo, make sure that the intention builds. That's another word for it. So you come in, you take away the argument, and then you build your evidence for why it's good, like why, this is going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And it's not manipulation. I really think that persuasion is, especially when you're talking to something that is like, it can be anything, right? It can be, most of us are trying to help people's lives. We're trying to enrich people's lives. We're trying to make the world a better place, right? And so by doing that, this is a very easy, tried and true formula. And look how people do it, right? Take op-ed pieces, look at these persuasive things, and reverse engineer, take it apart, see, read. And this is another thing I always do when I'm working with people is, before we work together, as I am getting their voice, they send me their 3 reads, any Netflix series they like, and you see, what do you like, what moved you, what persuaded you. That's your map, that's your roadmap to get there. It's your sensibility. You have it all. It's like Dorothy. She always could get home. She had a little, she just didn't know it. You really do have it all inside. You just follow your own sensibilities and your own, true north. And you'll find that you will be moving the needle for people in ways you never imagined.
Amazing. Amazing. So you have said elsewhere that writing books and screenplays these aren't just revenue streams for you. So what are they then?
Yeah. It's amazing work. I've written with people who have, like I said, gone through these huge, huge moments in their life, and the work was their life raft.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've experienced that. I've had in my own life, I've had a piece that was my life raft.
Yeah.
When things are completely upside down and crazy, I have the great honor in shepherding people sometimes through those experiences and seeing them to the other side, and seeing that the darkness does turn into light. And my small role in that is to provide the safe little island, a place to come create, to organize, to make it easy and effortless, in the face of challenges. And really, those challenges, those things that people go through, inform the work beyond. You can't even imagine the work that how much better it is. I've gone through like wars, pandemics, revolutions. I've had people's livelihoods be lost overnight. So it's all just an honor to go through that with people. It's, like I said, a sacred experience.
It feels sacred. It feels sacred. And I felt many times that my work is sacred. So, Laura, where can our listeners learn more about you and your services?
At laurasmagicday.com.
Awesome. And what's a good next step for them to take with you? Well, first of all, I just
Oh,
want to say people need to follow you on LinkedIn because, and I will put those links in the show notes, because your stories on LinkedIn are, first of all, Laura's Magic Day is a great way to describe them. They are so magical and they're just amazing. And we hear stories of you on the boat and your adventures, but also your life stories. And as everyone can hear, you're an amazing storyteller. So, but you should definitely follow Laura's LinkedIn, because her posts are just such a delight in my timeline. So where else would you like us to?
Thank you so much. That means so much to me, Samantha. That is such a sweet thing to say.
Sure.
For people that want to know more, there's a work with me tab. So it's just filling out some information, and so I can know more about how I can help you.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
I can work people with short term trying to find their story, or long term on bigger project, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, Laura's working right now with one of my clients who is delighted with her on finding, it's like we all have this kind of like expertise that we do, or our signature system that we do. And sometimes there's like a bigger story behind that. And so it's a little memoir. It's a little, it's not a textbook. Let's just say that. So I love that you're doing that work.
Oh, thank you. And, it helps get the message out there because it's more, like I say, relatable. So once people understand it, then they can take the systems and the ideas and create things and understand it better. So they'll want to use it more. Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you for everything, Laura. I so appreciated it. Y'all can, those watching the video know that her video is fighting because she's on a boat, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
I know I'm on an island. People on on the mainland envy those of us on an island, and those of us on an island are like, I could be on a boat.
Yeah, we're separated by a continent. I'm almost.
I know exactly.
We're all the way.
Pretty far. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with me, Laura. And Laura and I are wishing those of you, our listeners and viewers, a profitable and joyful consulting business. Thanks. Thanks for watching. I'd appreciate if you'd like this episode, and if you enjoyed the show, why not subscribe? Be sure to click the bell to get notified when new episodes drop.